Good afternoon and welcome to History by the Lake. Today we are talking about the Sanders family and D.T. Sanders Store, one of Greenville's best-known family businesses. This will not be a complete genealogy or a complete business history. We could not do that in 1 hour, especially with this crew. Instead, we are going to use the store as a doorway into family memory, what it was like to grow up around Sanders Store, to work there, to know the people behind the counters, and to see the business change over time. I am grateful to have members of the Sanders family with us today: Judy, Susie, Jan, and Darylin. I will guide the conversation, but the memories belong to the family. So before we go back to the beginning, let's put the story in its place. To understand this story, it helps to picture the corner of Main Street and Pleasant Street. Sanders Store stood in the building many people now know as Northwoods Outfitters. Main Street was the storefront, the public face of the business. Pleasant Street was the family neighborhood behind it. That corner is really the center of today's story. With that corner in mind, we can go back to the man whose name was on the store. The Sanders story begins with David Tilden Sanders, better known as DT. He came to Greenville as a young man and learned the mercantile business here. By 1857, he had started what became DT Sanders and Son. At this point, we are still in the early Greenville story. A small village, a lake and forest economy, and a business world built on personal trust. DT did more than open a store. Over time, the store became part of how Greenville worked. Come on in, folks. There's 3 seats down front here. By the late 19th century, Sanders Store had become more than a place to buy goods. It was tied to townspeople, lumbermen, guides, sportsmen, and visitors coming into the Moosehead region. That is one reason this family story matters. The store was private family property, but it also became part of public Greenville life. So here's the first question, ladies. When you were growing up, did the family talk about Sanders Store as something special, or was it just the store? Because it was part of your everyday life.
Before we start, I want to introduce our grandchildren. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Over here we have Madison, and that's Susie's granddaughter.
Stand on up.
Stand up and say hi. And then we have Lucy, and we have Hannah, my granddaughters.
All right.
So, another generation.
I'm not sure who the first and second lady is. Would you introduce them all, please?
Okay. Of course, it's always your brother that doesn't listen the first time. Judy Sanders, Susie Sanders McKendry, Jan Planet Earth Douglas, and Darylin Gauvin. You all set now? Okay. Good. All right. So, Judy, go ahead.
All right. I think that from the time I hit elementary school, for sure, I knew that this was a special, we had a special history with the store. So yeah, it was something special, I thought, from a very early age.
I didn't think it was anything special. It was the store. It's where, here we go. Our family was special, and the store was, to me, it was just the place of work, and it was the family that was more special and the history of the family.
I'd agree with Susie. It was the store. It's just what we grew up with. It's what we knew as being part of our daily lives, but it was our families that brought us together.
And I agree with Judy. It was special. We thought it was very special because we could go in and get candy and use the bathroom or whatever we needed to do. So I mean, it was like a stop on the way home.
So if you're already lost because the family is so big, we're going to do a quick family map to try to acquaint everybody with. So to keep the family line clear, I want to slow down for just a minute. The first generation was D.T. Sanders. He was born in 1836 and died in 1910, and he founded the business. D.T. married Louise Sawyer in 1858, and after her death married Celeste Robinson. The second generation was his son, Harry A. Sanders Sr. He was born in 1859 and died in 1941. Harry Sr. was married to Octavia Dean Sanders. The third generation is the one that connects most directly to today's story. That was Harry A. Sanders Jr. and his brother Paul Dean Sanders. Harry Jr. was known within the family as Pappy and was married to Kate Laura Sanders, known within the family as Mammy. Paul was married to Edith Sanders. The fourth generation was Harry A. Sanders III, better known as Brud, and his wife Claire. Brud became the last Sanders to run the store. So that gives us two family branches represented here today. One branch comes through Harry Jr. and Kate, then Brud and Claire. The other comes through Paul and Edith, then their daughter Tavy and her husband Hank Gauvin. So Judy and Susie, they're Brud's daughters, and Jan and Darylin are Hank and Tavy's. We're not going to cover every branch of the Sanders family today. There's way too much history for 1 hour. But this gives us enough of a family map so that the rest of the story will hopefully make sense. So ladies, does the basic family map that I'm showing sound right to you all?
Yes,
Anybody I'm forgetting that you want to make sure we mention?
you've covered it.
Okay. So now let's go back to the store and what happened after DT. When DT died in 1910, the store did not jump straight to Harry Jr. and Paul. It was continued through Harry A. Sanders, DT's sons, and their father. Harry Sr. helped carry the business into the next generation. And then his sons, Harry Jr. and Paul, became central to the store's 20th century story. Like many long-running family businesses, Sanders' store went through hard years and changing times. Remember, when Harry Sr. took over, we had World War I, and then the Depression, and then World War II. The important point is that the store stayed in the family and kept adapting. And that brings us to the brother generation that connects the older store to the years many people remember. Harry Jr. is central to many family memories, but Paul also deserves his place. Paul worked in the store for decades, and Harry Jr. credited him with much of Sanders' store's success. So before we move into the later business story, we need to remember both brothers. They helped bring Sanders' store into the modern era. So my question to the family is, what stories did you grow up hearing about Harry Jr. and Paul, and how were they different from each other?
That's a big question. I didn't know Paul. I don't remember Paul as well. But I do remember that my grandfather told me more than once through the years how much he loved him and how much he missed him. They were a team. They were a total team. I think they were different, but I'm going to leave that to the others to talk about.
I do remember Uncle Paul. He was, let's see, I was probably about 10 when he passed, and it was a really big, it was a tough time for the family, my grandfather in particular and my father, and it was a big loss to the team and the store. I would have to say that Uncle Paul was probably the heart of the store. He was a very kind person. I remember one time my father said, we're keeping the store going and Uncle Paul's giving it away. He was very kind and generous. He was a good person.
Well, I'm one of the youngest cousins here.
Bragging.
Wait, I am bragging. And my grandfather died about 6 months before I was born, so I never got to know him. And it was I really wished I had. My grandmother told wonderful stories about Grandpa. But I will say that Uncle Harry kind of filled the void. He always seemed happy to see us, and would had pet nicknames for us when we'd come in the store. And so in my mind, kind of Uncle Harry kind of was like my grandfather.
And of course, I remember Paul, and he was the one that told me one day I couldn't run in the store because Uncle Harry would have to yell at me if I did. And Jerry Hamilton told me a story one day about, similar to what Susie just said. Harry told him, I work all day trying to make a buck, and Paul works all day trying to give it away. And so that was kind of, they were different, but they were the same.
I will add that my grandfather was very serious, and he was a businessman. He was a consummate salesperson, though, and I would have to say that he taught me how to manage difficult people and how to talk to people I didn't know, and just being around, it was old-fashioned customer service that I learned that did me well through life. But my Lord, he was so serious at times. My grandmother used to call him the Dedimus Justice, whatever that meant. But in any case, he was serious, and he didn't want us to. He wanted us to behave, and one of the things he used to say was, "Now, girls, be ladies. Don't embarrass me." And he would say that when we went to church with him on Sunday. He would say that when we were in the store. He was always very concerned about how we behaved in the store, which for me wasn't that great.
And I think he's saying it right now. I do.
So by the time we get into the 1950s and 60s, the world around the store had changed. That is where the post-war recreation story comes in. After World War II, Moosehead's recreation economy grew. Fishing, hunting, camping, canoe trips, family vacations, boats, motors, outdoor clothing, and sporting goods all became a bigger part of the store's identity. By the 1960s and 70s, skiing belonged in that story too. Sanders' store was tied not only to fishing and summer camps, but also to Squaw Mountain and the winter recreation economy. Sanders was selling more than merchandise. It was outfitting people for the Moosehead experience. So my question is, by the time you remember the store, did it feel more like an old country store, an outdoor store, or some or both?
Well, my grade school years, those years, it was an old country store. I remember we had groceries, and we sold all kinds of clothing and hardware, and we had the big fish display. I mean, I just remember it that during those days as an old country store. Now, when I started working there in the 7th grade, it was a different story. That's when it really became more sporting goods.
Yeah, it was a general store to me. I really didn't think of it as anything else. And I'm the one that grew up in the store in the 50s. I'm the last of the Mohicans, the oldest Sanders woman left. And primarily my memories are probably from the 50s. And again, it was just a general store to me. It wasn't necessarily my favorite place to spend time. We'll get into that later.
I would agree that it was more of a general store growing up. I mostly grew up in the middle 60s and the 70s, but I loved the clothes that Ruth Hubbard would get in up back. She had all the latest jeans and sweaters and moccasins, and so, when fall came to get ready to go to school, I couldn't wait to go shopping at Sanders and take it up on Grandma's approval, as Ruth Hubbard would say. Charge it to Grandma.
Charge it to Grandma. Yes, I was there in the 50s and the 60s, and of course back then we had groceries. One of my favorite things was the cheese wheel. When you go in the door, remember we had that big cheese wheel, and it was just, and then when they went out of groceries, we ordered our groceries from Wortman's, and they delivered them and brought them to Grandma's and put them in the refrigerator in the cupboard. So, that was just what happened with it. My mother thought A&P was a dirty word, and so.
So, another connection of the store to the people of Moosehead was through Sanders Real Estate. Harry Jr. entered the field in 1925, and it became another way the Sanders family connected people to Moosehead. Through that work, they helped people find camps, homes, land, and businesses, as well as a lasting place for the region. So a question to the family, was the real estate side something you were aware of growing up, or did it feel separate from the store?
Well, I was very aware of it, and it seemed, I guess when I think about it, it seemed like it was a separate business. You know, it just seemed separate a little. We'll talk a little bit more about how Dad felt about working in the store, but I always felt that he really liked the real estate better than work the store. I always felt that way. And in later years, he encouraged me to get my real estate license, which I did. And I actually traveled with John Morrill and Thelma Colby. We traveled down Bangor or Orono, somewhere down there, and we traveled for a year, and we finally all got our licenses. I never used it. Never used it. Education became my passion and still is.
Judy, would people come to the store for real estate, or did they have a separate office?
Well, they had a separate office later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, not.
The office was my grandmother's dining room table at my grandfather's, their house, I think. They didn't have an office really until probably the late 60s, early 70s. In the 60s. Yeah, yeah. I remember the best part of the real estate part was going with my father and my grandfather to do appraisals and to look at lots. And they were developing properties, land to sell over on Wilson Pond and Beaver Cove and the Crafts Road, and I used to at the Highlands, and I used to go along with them in the old truck when they were doing appraisals, and that was time spent with our grandfather and father. They were always working, so that was an opportunity. So the real estate had a very different, I guess, meaning for me, other than just a business.
I really don't have much to add, other than there was a sign in the window that said, H.A. Sanders, the real estate man. Is that what it was? Yeah. That's all I know about the real estate business.
Yeah, that's about it.
So Brud later continued the work. And as we move towards the 1960s and 70s, we're moving into Brud's period too, the last generation of Sanders family ownership, in the period many people remember from inside the store. We're going to come back to Brud later in the program, but first I wanted to widen the family picture beyond the names that usually appear in the business record. So we've talked about DT, Harry Sr., Harry Jr., Paul, Brud, and the business side of the Sanders story. That is the way the public record usually reads, because those were the names tied most often to the store, the ads, the newspaper articles, and the business itself. But that is not the whole family story. Before we move fully into living memory, I want to pause on the family behind the store sign. The Sanders story also includes women like Octavia Dean Sanders, Kate Lord Sanders, Edith Sanders, Claire Sanders, Tavy Sanders Gauvin, and others whose name belong in the story too. They may not always appear in the store name or the business headlines, but they were part of the family life that surrounded the store. So ladies, when you think about all the women in the Sanders family, who helped hold the family together or helped keep the family life moving behind the scenes?
Oh, it was the women. No question about it. They held everything together. They really did. I want to just tell you how they both came to the store, because it's interesting. It's like history repeats. My grandmother had gone to normal school in Castine, which was to be a teacher, and she hated it after the first year, so she was looking for work. And she looked in the paper, and sure enough, there was a job at Sanders Store in Greenville, so she came on up. Well, a number of years later, my mother was looking for a job. She was living in Massachusetts then, I think, and she saw an ad in the paper to come, Greenville needed Moosehead Lake, Sanders Store, and she thought, oh, that would be fun. I'd like to try that out. So up she came. Each one of them married the boss's son in turn. So that always was fascinating to me. So that was important. I just think they were all so important. Our fathers, grandfathers worked all the time. They really did. So it was, the mothers were the ones, I think, that held everything together on the home front.
I always thought that it was Aunt Edie that held it together, primarily because she kind of ran the telephone office and she knew everything that was going on. And if I needed to know where my mother was playing cards in the afternoon, I could just call up and say, Edie, where's Mom? Oh, yeah, she's over at Bernice Young's. They're playing canasta or whatever. But Edie was a force of nature. She really was. And she was the one that would make sure that flowers were placed on graves and cards were sent to people. And she just was very much a force of nature in the town of Greenville. I always found her to be somewhat powerful and a little bit intimidating.
Well, that's true. Grandma for me was it. We lost our mother in 1969, and my grandma was very instrumental in looking over all 5 of us and taking care of us and opening her home to us and trying to keep me on the straight and narrow, not always successfully, but she was my gram. She was everything to me and very strong. Loved the store, loved Brud, loved Uncle Brud, thought he was wonderful, and she'd always say, now don't go down there and pester Brud. Don't go down and pester Brud. So for me, that was Graham, but it was also Aunt Kate. Aunt Kate was a big part of our lives as well. You wouldn't find a sweeter woman than Aunt Kate. I can still see her smile and her laugh. She was just wonderful.
Yeah, Mammy used to tell Pappy that if she wanted the truth about what her cooking, she said, I'll ask Derry. I don't ask the rest of them because they'll all say, oh, it's great. And she said, and Derry will say, not true. Not that good. And my mother was in there too. She, after college, and she worked in Louisiana for a while, and then she came back home and worked in the store. And she did the bookkeeping when the center, remember when it was up in the middle of the floor? Yeah. And she did that until she got married in 1948 and started having children. So that was probably the end of her time in the store. But she had many stories, and some of them I'm not allowed to tell. So there we go.
She also met our dad in the store. He was a game warden. And the other lady I want to mention is our great-grandmother, Octavia, who our grandmother thought the world of and really listened carefully to all her advice and her medical, holistic ideas, and I would really like to have known her, Octavia.
My grandmother was a very quiet, stay-at-home sort of person. She never learned to drive, but she was really well loved. I thought of something else I want to say, but now it's gone. So carry on.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So that gives us a fuller family picture. Now let's move from the public record and the family map into the store as you remember it. Up to this point, I've been giving the audience some structure: the place, the generations, the branches, and the business changes. But the heart of today's program is not just what the records say. It is what the store felt like to the people who grew up around it, worked in it, and knew the people behind the counters. So now I want to turn more of this over to the family. So when you see this picture of Sanders Store, in the years you remember best, what comes to mind first?
Those fish. Oh, there's a good story about the fish.
Well, the thing that comes to my mind first is the people who worked there. They were wonderful. We're going to talk more about them later, I know, so I won't go there. But I do see Stuart here. And your mother was everything to us when we worked there. Yeah, she was. So it was about the people. And I don't know. My father knew I loved to read when I was really young. I really loved to read, and I loved Nancy Drew. Oh, I love Nancy Drew books. You like Cherry Ames. I like Nancy Drew. And so he said, I'll buy you whatever book you want. And he put on the bottom of one of the shelves, he had a little place there for my books. He would buy books as I needed them or as he found them. And I could hardly wait to go after school and get down and look and see what books that he had there for me. So I remember that, and I remember the wood floors and oiling the wooden floors. I remember that.
When you go into Northwoods across the street, I can still smell that oil smell. The store still smells the same. It has a little bit more of a coffee aroma, but it still smells the same. When you walked in back in the 50s when they had groceries, in the summer in particular, they had all the fresh vegetables, and there were cookies, lots of Nabisco cookies, I remember. And they were all kind of lined up in the front. And there was always dried fish that you made Finn & Hattie with. It was dried salted cod, and there was a case of it right there as you walked through the door. And there was a cat that would come in and lick the fish. Well, I found out about this. My grandfather was cursing this cat one day, so I made it my mission that if I saw the cat outside, I'd leave that door open just a crack so that the cat could come in and lick the fish, and I could hear my grandfather saying, "Susie, you're plaguing me again, you're plaguing me again." So that was his favorite, "You're plaguing us." So.
Besides the clothes, which I really liked in the 60s and the 70s, they had a nice selection of linen handkerchiefs, ladies' hankies. And whenever it was Grandma's birthday, on that day, because I'd forget, I'd run down and pick out a couple of handkerchiefs for Grandma, and Ruth would wrap them up, Ruth Hubbard would wrap them up for me, and put them on Grandma's charge account and take them up to her.
Well, being the last one to speak here, I can't remember. What was the question? Yes, I do remember. What I remember a lot about the store is before it was renovated, the doors, the front doors on the store, they were double doors. And when we'd go down there with Grandma after the store was closed at night or Christmas Eve, and we'd come out and she'd lock the doors, but she made us, each one of us, take a turn shaking the doors to make sure they were locked. And then after they renovated, of course, those doors were gone, but that was one big thing I remember.
And I remember the one time that we came down to work, because I worked there 5 days a week from the time I was in 7th grade. And I remember the one morning we came down there, and we looked, and there were people all over the inside of the store. And my father said, "That's what I've been worried about all these years." But I don't know, we didn't lose anything, I don't think, but the store was open. It was open.
I don't want to have to answer that one.
No, I just want to start with you. Let's
Okay. Where are we going now? Still with the store?
Okay, you probably should have kept the microphone, because you're in these pictures.
Okay, bossy, go there.
So as we move into living memory, I want to start with what it was like for the next generation to grow up around the business. Sanders Store was not just a place the family owned. For the younger generation, it was a place where they spent time, worked, watched the adults work, met customers, and learned what a family business required. And I think it's important not to make this too sentimental. Growing up around the family store could be meaningful, but it could also mean work, obligation, and long days. So the question is, what was it like growing up with the Sanders Store as part of your family life?
Oh, it was big. And I can't lie, there were times during my teenage years when I yearned to be out of that store and on the lake. But it was just part of who we were and who I was. I worked there. And I did love it. I love the people. I know we're going to talk more about that. But one of my fondest memories, we had a shoe bench there. And in the afternoon, my grandfather would come back from his nap, and he went home for a nap, and he'd sit down and he'd go. And that meant, get over here and listen. And that's when he dispensed wisdom and justice, depending on what I'd been doing. But I learned, or not doing well, or doing well. But I do remember that. It was, it was just a huge part. And from the time I started in the 7th grade, there was a savings account for college. Part of that money had to go in and pay for college. We were expected to go.
Judy or Susie, how many days a week were you open?
They were open, they were closed on Sundays,
And what were the hours?
8 to 5, yeah.
7:55.
Oh.
4:50.
And in a lot of the ads I see, they took lunch breaks, closed for an hour at lunch.
They didn't during my time.
No, they took turns.
They closed from 5 minutes to 12 until 1 o'clock.
Did they during
Yeah,
our time? I
but if
forgot.
someone was in there or
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
then when I worked there, I would stay and do the shop.
I forgot.
Yeah. I remember when Dad used to close up at 5 o'clock, and he would say, "Get away from the door. Do not look out. Get away from that door." And I'd like be hiding behind the counter because if someone came to the door, 9 times out of 10, my grandfather would open up and let people in, and then, we'd be there forever. When in the beginning, when you asked what the store meant to me, and I said, well, not much. I took it for granted. It was sort of an extension of my family life, and like I slept at the house up on Pleasant Street, but the store was just part of our being, and like we stopped in on the way home from school, we could go to the bathroom, we could get something to eat. We were babysit there if, Mom was away or whatever. So it was just kind of an extension of our family life. And so I really didn't see it as anything special. Now I do, but back then, I was just a kid, and it was part of where I went. I went to hide from bullies there. That was a good thing. And, if someone was chasing us or the little cousins, we'd run in the store, So it was like home.
Being so much younger, I didn't get a chance to work in the store, but I always wanted to. And so I would go in when I was old enough to talk Rena May and to let me replenish the bags. She worked up front at the counter, and she'd let me go upstairs, which I loved the upstairs of Sanders' store, the apartment, which we'll probably get into later. And it held all the supplies, and she'd let me go up and bring down the bags. Or we had Hallmark cards in the back, the card display. And if there was an empty number, Ruth would let me open the drawers and replenish the cards that were missing in their slots. And the other thing I'd like to say is Rena May taught me how to make change, which came in handy when I worked at the dairy bar for 7 years, because all we had was a cigar box, and you had to count back change. A lost art, and Rena May taught me that.
And all the dollar bills had to go the same way. Don't forget that. I was there all the time, and I remember going in after school every day, of course. And again, with Stuart's mom, she'd say, "What did Stewie do today? Did he get in trouble?" And I'd tell her. And but both our grandparents had their newspapers and their mail brought into the store. They'd go over to the drugstore, someone in the morning, and pick up the Bangor Daily News, and there'd be one that said HAS Junior on it, and the other one they'd write PDS on it for Grandpa. And I'd go in and pick up Grandma's mail and paper and take those up to her. So it was just like our own little business there. So it was fun.
So one of the reasons the store was so busy in those years was the summer outdoor world that came through Greenville. Before we talk about those summer crowds, we need to remember something about Moosehead in the 1950s and 1960s. Boys' camps, canoe trips, and organized summer outdoor programs were much more visible here then than they are today. Groups came through Greenville on their way to the lake, the rivers, the woods, and the camps. Camps like Camp Allagash especially would bring in a lot of kids. Sanders' store was one of the places that helped outfit the world: clothing, gear, fishing tackle, camp supplies, and advice. So what do you remember about the summer crowds, those camp groups, or the kids from the boys' camps coming into the store?
Oh, we remembered the boys. Yeah. I took special care on the day. We knew when they were coming. We know. They notified the store beforehand because they would come in and they'd pick up orders. Sometimes they'd ordered in, or they'd pick up incidentals. Oh, yes. We were very aware of those boys' camps.
Well, Judy loved to work in the store. It didn't matter whether it was the winter or summer. She loved the store. I, not so much. Wasn't really my cup of tea. It was pretty boring to me, except for when the boys' camps came in. And my father could always depend on me to do one particular job when the boys' camps were there. And that was to look for shoplifters. Now, if any of you remember Laugh-In, there was I'm sure you don't, it was a long time ago, but in any case, there was a guy, Artie Shaw, and he used to be in a German uniform, and he'd be peeking behind bushes and looking at people and going, very interesting. That was me. I was in disguise. I would have to dress up in ordinary kid play clothes, something that mother wouldn't approve of. But in any case, I had to look like a camper. And and I would kind of pretend to be looking, and I'd be behind counters and looking for shoplifting kids. Sometimes I'd see them, sometimes I wouldn't, but I'd get paid 50 cents an hour for doing that. In which case, I would take that money, save it up, and go over to Don Folsom's store across the street and buy new clothes.
We did that. That's right. We loved Don Folsom's clothes.
Yeah. So that was the end of my career in the store. I was a shoplifter queen, the security department.
I have no memories of the boys' camps, none whatsoever. But Dawn Folsom's, yes, they sold Garland, and we sold Pendleton, right? Garland.
We had Pandora sweaters, and they had Garland. And I stopped there every day, too, after school to visit with them on my way home. So I knew everything that was going on downtown, and I still do. Yeah, enough said.
So that brings us inside the store itself, because people remember not just what Sanders sold, but what it felt like to walk in. Just how many remember going into the Sanders store? Raise your hand. Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
How many of you remember the crow's nest? This is going back. A few of you remember the crow's nest. It was the center of the store was where Dad initially worked up there. My mother and my grandmother. It was like bookkeeping, and they didn't have a pneumatic tube for the change, but they had a pulley and a string system, and they'd shoot it down to they'd make the change and shoot it down. I don't remember how it worked because I don't have an engineer brain, Doug. But anyway. Was it a rope? Yeah. Yeah. All right, what was your question?
Well, were you surprised how many hands went up? Were you surprised?
Oh, I was, but
okay, well,
yeah.
So this will be a little easier to look at these pictures now and be able to recall. But the store's own ads said Sanders stocked almost everything. And looking at the departments, that seems pretty close to true. Sporting goods, outboard motors, camp supplies, skiing outing wear, men and women's wear, hardware, kitchenware, gifts, and even groceries until the early 1960s. In fact, if one of the pictures of the store I put up earlier, you could see IGA in front of, above the windows. But a store is more than just a list of departments. People remember how it looked, how it sounded, how it smelled, and where things were. So, ladies, when you walked into the Sanders store, what did you see first, and how was the store laid out?
Well, when I worked there, you walked in, and as you walked in the store, your fishing tackle was on the right. Remember all the tackle, and Nick Hansen worked, and what? On your right. It was on your left. I don't know where it was. It was in there somewhere. My frame of reference is I realize is from inside the store, So if you're inside the store, the fishing tackle was on the right, and then they had housewares a little bit in the middle of the store. I mean, clothing was in the back. They had wonderful Pendleton and Johnson woolens and Bass Weegens, and they had a lot of really great stuff, which is, now back in mode, a lot of it, if it ever went out. So that's, I don't know that I answered the question, but I'm moving it on.
What else?
Well, up back where the ladies' clothes were again, that's where I am, there was a big wooden counter, and Ruth Hubbard usually was behind that, pencil in her hair, behind her ear. And above the counter, there was a big string, a spool of string that ran on a pulley system. Yeah. And when you got your packages, she'd tie up your packages with the string and cut them off and then go down to the next. There was also a large, it was a yardstick. And when the fabric was cut and things, they'd use that to do the fabric. Do you remember that? We had fabric, yeah. That's what I remember.
And the bags were brown, white and brown stripes and said D.T. Sanders on them. I remember that too. And I remember Ruth many times, if we didn't have something, she'd say, "It's on order." That was it's on order.
And the in the back on the left side was Thelma's domain, Thelma Colby's domain, with the swinging door, and that's where we got our mail in the office when it was back there.
I spent more time exploring other parts of the buildings with my cousins, John Sanders and Sandy Gauvin, and my other cousin, Jim Sanders. We were, yeah. Mm-hmm. And there were storehouses galore around there. There was a big barn out back, and then there was the giant storehouse with the big wheelie thing, pulley thing, and then there was the inner storehouse, and then there was the basement and the sub-basement. And those were creepy places to go. And there was a sub-basement that really was draining the water from Pleasant Street into the lake back in the 50s. I mean, literally it was. There was a channel. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was like a channel in the sub-basement, and there were rats down there.
Water rats, big rats.
And rats didn't bother me, but they bothered my cousins, and so there was sort of a power struggle there. Who was going to go down into that sub-basement? And occasionally we did have to go down for something. They'd send us, down for supplies. But there was a regular basement and then this sub-basement. We explored all over. We liked to go up into the apartment upstairs, which belonged to D.T. That's where he lived. And with his first wife and his second wife. His second wife was a mystery woman to me because they referred to her as Grandmother Sanders. And I never really quite understood who she was. She was D.T.'s widow, his second wife, and she lived up there. And she was a homeopath, which is yeah, they both were. Yeah. I got her kit. Homeopaths back then was an alternative form of medicine. People were actually trained in it, and she did that along with Octavia, and they would minister unto sick people in town before the doctor was there. I don't know, but I actually had her kit, Celeste's kit for homeopath, and I donated it to a medical place in Massachusetts when I didn't know any better, and I wish I had it now. But anyway, I thought that was very interesting. I was up there a lot, nosing around, looking into cupboards, and they had a pull-chain toilet, one of the old water closet things up there. Yeah, it was cool. Neat place.
That's very interesting. When I used to go in the store, I'd go right over and look at all the fish that were mounted up on the wall.
I know. That was epic, yeah.
And I think I read somewhere where it was like, for a time, one of the largest collection of mounted fish anywhere. So, yeah, those are great stories. Yeah. And I better stay on script or we will go a long time.
We will.
But Judy, when we met to discuss this, you mentioned that Christmas time had a certain feel.
Oh, yeah. I love Christmas, and I especially love Christmas Eve at the store because we stayed open late. We stayed open. That was the one night of the year that we stayed open until there wasn't anyone on the street. And people knew that. And so my job was to wrap the gifts, and I love doing that. And it was fun. People would come in, especially we got a lot of men, I remember. Yep, a lot of men on Christmas Eve. And we wrapped for the men. But the person that I loved to wrap for the most was the one who came in shortly before closing every single year, and that was Grandma Edie. And Edie would come in and she'd say, "Okay, I haven't done a thing, now you got to help me to pick out things for all the kids. And so we'd actually close the store around her, and then I'd stay and we'd pick out things for all her grandchildren, and I'd wrap them up. And I don't know, that was such a tradition for me with Grandma Edie, that she was Auntie Edie, but she was really Grandma Edie to all of us too. I remember that especially.
Do any of you others have Christmas story memories?
Only quick memory, when I was real little, I remember going into the store the day after Christmas, and it looked like a bomb went off. And everything was in disarray. My grandfather was in there straightening stuff out like he did. And I remember thinking, Santa was really messy. He didn't, I was like, I can't believe he was in here and he made this mess. I really believed as a little kid that Santa got his stuff from Sanders' store.
Well, what I remember is the display outside of the reindeer and Santa Claus that lit up. That, to me, that meant that it was Christmas time when you saw the display in the big window there.
When Judy said someone would come in just before closing, I thought she was talking about your dad, Mildred. Stretch used to come in just before closing and do his Christmas shopping and then wrap, and and I thought, that's who she met, but I forgot. Grandma Edie also had her annual Christmas Eve shopping spree, so.
So the store had merchandise, but it also had people. And that may be what many customers remember most. One thing that comes through very strongly in the newspaper articles and in the family memory is that the employees were not just passing through. Some gave decades of their lives to Sanders' store. Names like Nick Hansen, Rod Brett, Rena Watt, Ruth Hubbard, Thelma Colby, and others were part of the store's public face. And when I mentioned some of those names to the family, their reaction told me they were remembered with real affection. So who were the employees you remember most, and what made them special? And did the employees feel like workers, family, or both?
All the ones you named were special. They really were. They were, we called Uncle Rodney and Uncle Nick for sure. And Uncle Nick, when I was probably upper elementary, I loved to fish. And he would work all day, and then after supper, I'd be waiting on the dock, and he'd pick me up in his square stern, what do you call those? Had a motor on it anyway, it was square stern, like a canoe. And he'd take me up around Moose Island, and he taught me how to fish. So he was really important. And I have to talk about Rena. Rena she was the fun in the store, first of all. Never stopped working. She was always cleaning up everything. I mean, but she'd make us laugh. She was so good-hearted. We could talk to her about things that we might not talk about with our parents, and we really loved Rena. Thelma Colby was also very important to me. She was a confidant to me, too, and would always, give me information. They were just wonderful people. They were there our whole lives, and Nick Hansen died in the store. He had a heart attack, and he died in the store. I mean, they were family.
It wasn't just Nick and Rodney and Thelma and Rena. It was Nick and Emily, Rodney and Ruby,
Yeah.
Rena and Alex. That was the part that, to me, meant where I said the store was an extension of our home. We felt loved there, and good people.
I can see Rodney in his Pendleton shirt, and he had a very soft chuckle. He'd be usually chewing gum, and he'd always very friendly, like Uncle Nick was too. But Rena was everything. She, again, when my mother died, Rena really kind of took me under her wing and took me blueberry picking, had me for dinner, and our sister Jeannie too. She was just a wonderful person, as they all were. And Thelma Colby, I thought, was so pretty as a kid. I just thought she had the nicest smile, and her eyes would crinkle. And Ruth, God bless her, she ran that back of the store, and was just as interesting, and she was a staple in the store. So, and it did feel like we were home. When we were there, it was very comforting.
It was more like they were all family anyway. And remember the store used to have a store picnic every year, go out to Wilson Pond, and all the families would go, and they all just really happy. And when I think of Nick, he went to work at Sanders' store on June 12th, 1922. That was the day my mother was born. That's the story we'd always get. And then he died working in Sanders' store on December 14th in 1964. And so, I mean, he was just really seemed like family. We all called him Uncle Nick, and he was, and Emily, and Bonnie, his daughter, called Grandma my would-be grandma. And so that was really, it was fun. We were all one big happy family.
So now it's time to talk about Brud, because during the 1960s and 1970s, he was the Sanders most closely tied to the store that most of us here still remember. Harry A. Sanders III, commonly known as Brud, became the fourth generation and the last Sanders to run the store. His story is not simply that he inherited a business. Family memory suggests he came home because the family needed him. That gives his role a different meaning. It was not just an ownership, it was a responsibility. Brud also carried the store into a changing Moosehead economy. Fishing, hunting, camping, clothing, real estate, skiing, and the Squaw Mountain era. So the question is, how do you remember Brud's relationship with the store? Was it something he loved, something he felt responsible for, or maybe a little of both?
Well, there was no question about that story. I think we all knew it. Dad didn't want to come back to Greenville. He didn't plan on coming back to Greenville. He was in the service. My mother was with him. He was down in Pensacola. He was becoming a navigator. It was right at the end of the war. He never saw any warfare, but he loved it, and he expected to stay. His older brother, James, or Jimmy, was in the Air Force, and he had made it clear that he was making it, and he was the older brother, he was making it a career, and he just wasn't going to do it. And there came a period of time, and you're going to be able to tell the reasons why he came out. If it was Paul sick or was Pappy sick, I can't remember. But my grandfather called him and said, "You have to come home. You have to come home. We cannot carry on this business unless you come home." And home he came. And he told us many times through the years that, it wasn't his first choice. It really wasn't. But he came home, he did his duty, and he was there until his store closed.
I don't recall that anyone was sick. I think that the store was just growing, and they needed someone to really run the business end of it. My grandfather and Uncle Paul were down front and waiting on the customers, and they needed someone to run the business, do the accounting, and Dad did that. He was a little bit resentful over the years, but he did his best. He put in the hours, and he kept the business going. And we're not going to do too much about the business, but there were a lot of changes going on during the 50s, and groceries were really a money loser. They were making pennies on the dollar, and that's why they decided to go out of groceries. The big box stores and the chains and whatever were really taking over, that whole genre of business. And so they elected at that time to go more into real estate and also into sports and that type of thing. And Dad was the one that really was more or less responsible for setting all of that up, and then continuing on until he stopped. And he was running basically 3 businesses. He had the ski shop, he had the real estate business, in the store.
I just want to say one more thing. I forgot to say that the ski shop was really the business that he appreciated the most. And I see 2 people, the Perrys, who I remember working in there as a teenager, and you came in and you were our customers. I remember that. He liked that. He liked that work, and I think he saw that as his accomplishment, as his own.
Yeah, he really enjoyed working with his hands, actually. It wasn't just watching people in ski pants walk by. It was, although I think he liked that too. Yeah. I think he appreciated those Bogner pants. Yeah. But in any case, he really enjoyed putting skis together. And he would do that at home. You know, he really, that was kind of his thing, working with those skis, and that gave him some pleasure.
Talking about the ski shop, I just want to say is, like, he saw that I was learning to ski and I had an old pair of skis with Rudolph on them, and he set me up with Fisher Lewis and nice buckle boots. I felt so special, and I always felt like going up there that I was safe because Uncle Bud and Aunt Claire were there in the ski shop, and it was, she'd hold my quarter for my hot chocolate that I could get later on. But he was very generous, and loved Uncle Bud very, very much.
Yeah, I worked in the ski shop for 12 years with Brad and Claire until that went the other way. And it was great. But thinking of all the people who came from other places, even in the store, people would come in and they'd say, well, I could have gotten that cheaper in Bangor. And Brad would say, well, that's where you should have gotten it then. And that always stuck with me. Yeah, don't bitch.
So one story that shows the store's place in the community came after the Squaw Mountain Inn fire, a tragic fire that happened on June 30th, 1968. People escaped with little or nothing, and Sanders' store opened to help. Clothing, refreshments, and other help was offered to people who needed it. For me, that story says a lot about what Sanders' store meant in Greenville. It was a business, but in a crisis, it was also one of the places people turned to. What do you remember hearing about Brud in the store after the Squaw Mountain fire?
Well, I was there with him. I remember it well. As soon as he knew about the fire, we went down and opened up the store. And we were there, you know, for when the people needed to come down. Because many of the people, as I understand it, jumped out of windows, and they had their pajamas on, or maybe nothing. They were, you know, and they lost everything. They didn't have anything to wear, or, you know, so we had a lot of traumatized people in the store. It was, I'll never forget it. It was really a horrible event in this community, and people died. For the help that were working there, it was very traumatic. It was, you know, it was quite a thing. And Dad really wanted to be there, and he gave people whatever they needed. They could have it.
I was in nursing school at the time, and I was home on vacation, and he asked Judy and me to come down with him, and Judy was giving them supplies, and he had me doing first aid. I was back in the little section that had Band-Aids and alcohol and this, that, and the other thing, and he told me to go back there and dress their burns and give them whatever they needed, no charge, nothing. And so I was playing nurse back there, and Judy was outfitting them, and Dad he really didn't keep track of what people bought. He took their names, but people, they all paid him they came back and, you know, they sent money in, and didn't expect it. But they did. It was a very scary, tragic time for the town. Do you remember it?
I remember it, but I was too young to be there.
I vividly remember it, and it was really horrible. And I think we can get people right here who were there and can attest to what a terrible thing it was. But at least he was there, and he was able to step up and help them best he could.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about the store, but the Sanders story was not only Main Street, it was also Pleasant Street. Sanders store stood at the corner of Main and Pleasant Street was more than just the street beside the business. For the Sanders family, it was part of the family world. At one time, there were many Sanders families living on or near Pleasant Street, so the family story was not only behind the counter, it was also in the houses yards, gatherings, and everyday life around the store. So before I ask a question, because I love real estate, so DT lived in the store.
Yes.
Harry Sr. built a house that the later, how am I going to describe it? Big white house. The big white house on the left side of Pleasant Street that has the tower and the wraparound porch. That picture right there is that house before it got renovated and had the porch and the tower. And then Harry Jr.'s house was at the top of Pleasant Street, right next to the golf course, on the left side of the road. And then your house was a little bit further up the hill on the right side. And Jan, and Darylin's, your house was?
My grandparents' house was on Prospect Street. That's where Paul and Beanie lived. That's where my mother and uncle lived. We're married.
So did you ever try to change the name of the street?
No, but we had 12 cousins. There were 12 cousins that lived on the street. And I have to say, some of you may see yourselves here. I know two for sure, sitting right here.
Yeah, we lived on Pleasant Street growing up, our
Yeah.
family.
Well, tell us, what was it like having so many relatives living so close to the store and to each other?
It was great. You were never alone. You always had someone to play with and someone to stick up for you.
You always felt safe. You know, if you were walking home, and we always walked to school a mile up the hill and a mile down the hill. We did. We even walked home for lunch sometimes. We could always stop in, in one of our cousins' houses if we needed anything. It started to rain, started to snow, didn't feel good, whatever. But I also remember the Bradford house. Susan, yeah. The Bradfords were kind of like part of the family, and we used to stop in there in the morning, and we'd collect all the kids going down the street to walk to school, and we walked to school in a pack of people. But we always made it a mission to stop and get Susan and Betty so that we could have donuts and grape juice. Never forget that.
Well, I wrote down an answer because I wanted to remember. Pleasant Street was a wonderful, safe place, a nice feeling. Most of my cousins are, like I said, older, except for myself and Jeannie and Carolyn. So we were viewed as tolerated by them, but they were always around. They were always popping in and out of the house or Grandma's house. Susie and Sandy, our brother, would be skinning beaver down in the cellar until they hit the must sack, and my mother would yell, "Susie, get out from there," and they'd come running up. Oh, and she'd always call hello gremlins or pat our heads if we weren't too sticky. But I would love when they would visit and sit in the kitchen with Mama, with Tavy, and discuss life and hearing their laughter on Pleasant Street. It was a wonderful place to grow up, Pleasant Street. Many kids in the neighborhood. Sally Tonquist and I would play in the road, and every weekend we'd go down and buy a rubber baseball from Sanders' store, and I think that cost 23 cents, and we'd beg Grandma to give us 23 cents almost every week so we could play ball. It was a great upbringing.
I remember what we thought was the pond behind Grandma's house that we used to ice skate on down at the bottom of Pleasant Street when she moved down there. It's, in fact, where Barbara lives now. And so we'd go down there and skate on the pond. Turned out it was the sewer. We were skating on the sewer. Yeah. And then, of course, we had a lot of parties at my house during that time. After every event, my mother would let us have a party. And Judy would tell Brud, he'd say, "Where are you going to be?" And she'd say, "Oh, I'm going to Aunt Tavy's after the game or something." We never saw her there. But he thought that's where she was, so it was okay. But it was just, I can remember playing on the road, sitting in the road and playing, building dams and everything, because you know, Janice, you know, everybody lived right in that area, and it was, it just felt like we were safe, and there were no cars, there were no log trucks going up and down the road.
Well, th-
Susan Bradford said one time there were 75 kids on that street when we were growing up, and they all walked together. She was like a circus parade.
75 kids.
75. In that area. If you go, if you take Pleasant Street, Prospect Street, Cottage Street, Webb, Washington, I mean, all gathered around, but everybody seemed to.
But we're starting with the roads, huh?
Yeah. 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 Wow.
We were all either on the bus or.
Yeah. That's great. But like any good story, they come to an end sometime. And so after more than a century of family ownership, that long chapter came to a close. In 1981, Sanders' store was sold outside the family. For the public, that was a business transaction. For the family, it meant something much deeper. I do not want to dwell on the business details today, but I do want to acknowledge what the sale represented, the end of Sanders' store as a Sanders family business. The building continued, the corner continued, but for the family, that chapter was closed. So without getting into the business details, what did the end of the family ownership mean to the family?
Free at last. I think you can tell that I have a little bit of a different take on the store. Not the family, but the store. My father had 3 businesses going, and he did great. But I think that we were all very supportive of that. It was Mike's turn off. Oh, it's not on? It's dead. Oh, we talked too much. I'll just speak up. It was time, and we were all very supportive of that.
Trajan.
And he went on to have a really great retirement, and Claire got to golf 12 months of the year, and it was time. He was ready, and I don't even think he was 60. I think he was just short of 60 when he retired, so it was good. It was a good thing, free at last.
And we supported him 100%. The 3 of us didn't really want to, we had our own lives, our own families, our own careers that we were starting, and so we supported it. But it was kind of a hard time in some ways. In other ways, it was great.
Well, not being directly involved, I'll tell you, to me it was like going through the 5 stages of grief, because it was hard to see it not be our store anymore, our family store. I understand completely the reasons behind it, but it was hard to see it, you know, but life goes on, and it had to happen because Uncle Bud deserved a break for sure. But I can't help thinking that's how I remember feeling, is that was kind of like shock and grief and then acceptance.
I don't think I went in the store again for a long time after that. It wasn't the same, so I didn't do it. And that's how I cope with a lot of things. Okay, that's done.
I want to acknowledge, too, that the current owners, I personally think a lot of them, because they really have honored the history, and I've had many conversations with them about it, and they've allowed us to go take our kids and grandkids go up into the store, and Mike always tells about the fact that he wanted to buy that store from the time he was 13 years old, and I don't know if you've heard that story, but it's a true one.
That's great.
Do you want this back?
Thank you. Oh, we've got one more. And then you got questions to answer.
Okay.
Okay. So we have only touched a part of the Sanders story today. There is much more family history, much more business history, and many more memories that we could cover in one program. But I hope this has given people a clearer picture of what Sanders store meant. A family business, a country store, an outfitter, a workplace, a gathering place, and a landmark at the corner of Main and Pleasant. So my final question for you all is, when people remember Sanders store in the Sanders family's years from now, what do you most hope they remember?
I wrote this down, and I highlighted it. I'm the one that has to have the notes. I hope that people remember not only that the store sold just about everything. There was one legend that someone came in, and because it had on the sign, we sell everything, and asked for a pulpit, and HA went out back and got one. I don't know whether that's true, but that's a story. I hope that people also remember that the store welcomed everyone. I think that's important. And that's about the store. And as for the Sanders family, I hope people remember the generations of our family as hardworking people who loved the town as much as they loved each other. Because we were a very close-knit family. And I hope also it's remembered that the store helped make the town a little bit better for being there for so many years. And I think if those things are part of the memories that people have, that's a really good legacy. And on a personal note, I want to say that being here today, back now living in Greenville after a long time away, I really realize that the store didn't just shape our family, but in many ways it shaped me. And for that, I'm very grateful.
I can't build on that.
I think that the store, I always talk about it to people who may not know it as the store, but to me it represents our family, and big debt of gratitude to the generation before us that were cousins, but they were more like siblings, and they've made us all a lot closer because of their relationships, I think. So the store brought me my family.
Yes, yes to everything everyone said. It's just, it just always was there for us, so it was hard when it wasn't. But when we think back on it, it was good to us, good for us, and it shaped the people we are.
We were very lucky.
Yeah, we were.
We're very, very lucky.
Well, I want to thank the four of you for doing this. It's exactly why we do this series, not just to remember buildings and businesses, but to remember the families and people who give them life.